Today on Between the Lines, reaching a state of positive change with my guest, Gary Szenderski. Welcome, I'm Barry Kibrick. Gary is an internationally acclaimed expert on the subject of branding. His work usually takes him to the major companies of the world, but now with his book, Szen Zone, he shows how we can rebrand ourselves by overcoming our obstacles, our limiting thoughts, and anything else that holds us back in life.
I'm a writer today because I was a reader when I was 11 years old, and it was...
You do not need to prove your state of happiness to anybody.
Most of these speeches were as much as a month in preparation.
Characters, the heroes in this book, are seekers of truth in a story that involves a lot of
You
corruption.
don't get a chance to really talk about what's real, and this is the perfect to me.
Gary, it's a pleasure seeing you again. It's been a couple of years, maybe a few years since you've been here before, but welcome back to the show.
Right. Thank you, Barry. It's my pleasure to be here.
Well, I'm going to start with this, and in a sense, it is. It's the overarching theme of this book. It's all the aspects of change, what is required to make the change, and you even give us a little break. You say, by the way, not everyone has to change, but if you want to change, you give us the clues, the hints, the sort of secrets to, as an expert in branding, to branding and rebranding ourselves.
The book is written all about taking some control over things that can happen and even more control over things you want to happen. So, and I think in the book we talk about change can come at you and when you least expect it, but when it does, it's your perspective on how to handle it that really makes a difference. That's why I've called it a zone, the Szen Zone. It's a space in between where you do make the choice. And in branding, almost all of the work I do in branding has to do with what do we want to be at this next level? What do we want to be when we grow up? And you have to identify that and shoot for it. And that's a big change.
I think one of the biggest changes when you use these words, it's the power to recognize that we have the power. In other words, recognizing the fact that we have this ability to choose what we want and to rebrand, that's the first part of the change, isn't it? It's to recognize it.
Exactly, because a lot of times we don't even think about what we might do because we just don't think we have the chance to get there, or we don't have the skills to get there. So it starts with two things. One is wanting to be something or do something that you haven't done before. There's a change in that. There's a disruption to that. And the second thing is recognizing that you're the only one that can do it. And that's where the power comes from.
And you call it the liftoff point is, as you mentioned, our perspective. That how we're thinking about it from whether we're using our old eyes or our new eyes, our perspective changes, and that's the first sort of shot in the arm one needs, is to see that new perspective.
I totally agree with that. I think it's a kind of an internal karmic mantra you can form, because once your perspective changes, your horizons change, and you start to move toward it, in my world, or the way I think, it starts to come to you, because ultimately we always see just what we want to see. And if you have that perspective and focus, you can really have a much better chance of getting there.
Well, there's a classic line, if you think you're going to fail or you think you're going to succeed, you'll be right on both accounts.
Correct.
I think I know it's a funny line, but that's what that means, isn't it?
Exactly.
It's just that.
Yeah, it's exactly that. And so beliefs are so strong that belief in ourselves or someone believing in us, it doesn't have to come from us directly, can trigger all kinds of catalytic events to help us realize something that we maybe never thought was possible.
Well, one of those beliefs that you make sure we do become aware of is that we are not our resume. This is a very difficult thing because people think that, what defines us is what we've done, but really, and our mutual friend Michael says this a lot. What really defines us is what we're about to do, what we're going to do. And that's a point that you want to bring home, because so many people feel that, well, I'm defined by X and my resume. I'm not my resume. That's basically what you're telling us.
And I think, yes, that's true. And I believe too that you shouldn't be defined by where you are. you should be defined by who you are. And the who you are might still need to get out of that resume thinking. The resume thinking is just your wake behind you, and it's important to look at that to see where you came from, but it's not nearly as important as looking ahead to where you want to go.
You know, I mentioned before the perspective is the liftoff point, but you use also these words, I am, as the trigger that starts it all. So in other words, to some extent, it is as if it already has happened. So your change in your mind is, I am that already. Am I getting that right? Is that the correct drift?
That's exactly right. And for me, I use that as a kind of reminder because we all have different roles. You know, your father, your teacher, and I teach school, and I do branding, and I write. And when I want to feel a certain way, I say to myself, I am this today. I'm going to be a writer today. And writers act differently than parents maybe, or that teachers do. And we all have that ability to just change that perspective by just filling in that simple blank, I am whatever.
Well, you even say, you use the word as you're a writer, you say changing the script is what changes everything. So that's one of the words of the script, basically.
Oh yeah, I think if you think about your life as a story that's unfolding, you're going to be the main character, and you're going to bring people in your life, and people are going to leave. And if you want to change that chapter, all you got to do is just start thinking about what's the potential for this character to do something else. And that's really you got to kind of use your imagination to kind of get there, because otherwise you're going to only write something for the character that is predictable. And so much of what we want to change in our life is something that we've never done before, and thus it's not predictable.
Now, a lot of the change we're discussing now is focused on the within, whether it's within the mind, within the soul, within the spirit, within our script. But it's not just that, because people sometimes, you know, think and grow rich kind of stuff. There's an element there, but that's not the answer. As you say, the element really is the more we act, the more we gain. So we have to take action. It's not like we can just sit there and think these things. These things must trigger action. By themselves, they'll do nothing really. I mean, not that they won't maybe act as a catalyst, but the action still must follow through.
And the reason I think action is important is because it demonstrates that you actually believe it yourself. If you're willing to put some energy into getting to whatever that vision might be, that says, hey, I can do this. If you don't take any action, you're being held back somehow, or you have a fear of something that's not letting you get started. So action is that get starting.
But that, gosh, it's almost cliche to say it. We know that that's the hardest part, because when we're inactive, what is it? It's the form of inertia. Without that initial little push, or as Stephen Hawking said, the quantum fluctuation, without that little movement, it's hard to get rolling oftentimes. Mm-hmm. It's once you make that first even baby step, boy, it's hard to stop. But it's that first little push. That seems to be the hardest thing for us as humans to create within ourselves.
It is really difficult to get started, and it's difficult to get momentum. So the first push is the biggest, but then the second day, the third day, the fourth day, they say that your brain can rewire itself in 30 days. By answering the question, I am, whatever that new I am is, and you do that over a certain period of time, it actually can come to fruition. You start to believe it, and all those actions you've taken will start to actually come towards you. It's an amazing, it's not my law, it's just some kind of law that happens, is conviction can actually bring things to you.
But you say that we have to be brave enough to believe that, first of all, be bold enough to do it, and then be our best at the attempt of doing it. And I think it's that first one, and second together, that being brave and bold enough to even make that awareness that there is this connection between all of the energy that's out there. We might want to say that that's the potential energy, and the energy that we have is the kinetic energy, but that it still is connected is a realization that oftentimes we almost refuse to make, and yet it's one that even physics proves exists.
You're right. It's proven many times over that things become what you're thinking. The other issue, though, is oftentimes we feel we've got to sell people on what we're doing, and that's where the boldness comes in. We don't typically do things in isolation. If you want to make a decision to move to Ugalabupia, you've got family to consider, you've got work to consider, there's other things, there's other aspects. So we often get hung up on the conditions of the change as opposed to the change itself.
You have the E spot, you call it. Again, I'm meaning energy for no doubt. You have to clear away the old debris. And I remember having a wonderful guest, Jack Hokokian, on, who literally was a physicist who said that whenever energy transforms, it creates entropy. And entropy is the disturbance of the existence, and it's the one thing that continues to pile up. Even though energy never changes, or I mean, it can change into matter, and matter can change into energy, it stays always balanced. But it's that old debris that's created from this interchange that we have to clear up.
Yeah, it creates kind of an inertia, and it slows us down. And that goes to the resume comment you made earlier. You know, we carry our past with us sometimes like an anchor and say, I can only do this because this is all I've ever done before. And when you snip that tether and you start to get to see where you can actually turn and a couple different angles, or you see 180 degrees, it's amazing what a new vista, a new opportunity can do to get us changed and charged up to get there.
Now, one of the things in your book is brand aid, and I'll let you explain that, but I want to bring this in with it because I think this is one of the first steps to aiding your brand. You use these words, help is on the way. Asking questions is the purest form of being assertive. That in itself has this wild, non-common sense kind of attitude, but it's true. And as I was explaining to a dear friend, it sometimes is the counterintuitive stuff that is of the most importance and makes us really see clear, because that's true. Asking questions is not something we should be afraid of. It's a real sign of assertive curiosity, and you actually even use the words, it almost proves that you're fearless if you're not afraid to ask for help or questions.
I've found that a lot in my career, and I'll tell you, the best CEOs I work for and have worked with to help their brands have a high degree of confidence, enough so that they know what they don't know. They know they don't know it all, and they're willing to listen, and they don't mind being asked questions. They don't mind being pushed a little bit, because at the end of the day, you can't know it all anyway. And so that's where that fearlessness comes in, is when you know that you're okay even if you don't have all the answers. And then it's through the filter of the new vision. And you start to rethink things that you thought you knew, and that's where you start to see, those are those actions, those little steps that kind of get you close to the conclusion that you want to get.
You use these words, and I want to get them exactly, because I think this too is something that when we think of change, we may have a different opinion of. You say more often it's not and because we were talking about getting rid of that debris, but yet at the same time you say more often it's not the elimination of a clog, but the creation of a new path. So that's not contradicting the other statement, but it's in addition to the other statement, that oftentimes what's in our way is a clog, and we need to be aware. Actually, it's the other way around. It's not necessarily a clog, it's a new path that we have to find.
Yeah, taking a new path, one of the things I quote myself on is the key to success often is staying focused on the goal and not really thinking about how you're going to get there. Because once you start to think about how it's going to happen, all the obstacles start to pop up. And those are those clogs. And then you start spending time dealing with those obstacles, and you never really get there. But if you just stay focused on the goal, you can actually slide around those sometimes and find another route to get to where you want to be.
You know, it's funny, yesterday I was having an interview with someone, and I was mentioning who I was having on the show and the book, and I was telling them about how one could rebrand themselves. And the first question they asked is, well, sometimes isn't it too late? And I started to laugh, because that was just where I was in writing my notes, was at that moment. I says, no, I can even quote you. It's never too late once we understand why we want it. And I really mean, and I know you really mean, it's never too late. This could happen at any time in your life, and there's in fact, my own personal belief is, I like to think it should be happening all the time throughout your life, because otherwise, if you finally get to the point where there's no more change, what is there?
You've stopped somehow.
You did, am I right?
Because change is a constant, which is a lot of times people prefer not to, they want to give up the control of something that they can predict or can handle or is consistent. And people, by and large, don't like change for those reasons. It gets them upset, out of their rhythm. And there's something to be said about knowing that if I poured water in there, it's going to be water the next time I pick it up. But oftentimes, maybe you want to try a taste of something different. You got to get used to that. You know, Coca-Cola is a great example of a brand that had a great idea for a new formula, and they introduced new Coke, and it lasted about a nanosecond. And that's because we have relationships with things, and if you pull that out, that constant, it's disruptive. And that's how people look at change a lot of times, and that's why it doesn't happen.
Now, before you mentioned how important it was to stay focused on the goals, yet you give us a reminder that we must, while being focused, remain open to possibilities. That's, again, almost sounds counterintuitive, but it's not when you really look at it, because you must have this focus, but if you're not open to seeing where that next move should be, or if you should pivot here or adjust there, you may be focused on the wrong goal by the time you're done. So you have to remain open as you're focused. That's probably one of the harder things to do, I would guess.
But that said, it's also one of the things that happens a lot. Once you decide you want to do something, the phone will ring or something will happen, and if you're open to picking up that call, you might hear something that'll actually support what you want to do. But if you think you know all the answers and you have to do it yourself, which I don't recommend for anybody, change is something you want to bring people along with, you're going to be surprised that you can't really do it all. You can't move every mountain. So being open is another way of saying, let somebody get in or help me, and let's see what can go from here.
You say also, it's not just the reaching of the goal or the focusing on the goal, it's setting the right goal to reach. And I think that's probably where the fear lies the most, because is this what I really want? Is this what I really should be doing? And yet, if we don't set that right goal and make it reachable, I think that's another thing too. We're not talking about the pie in the sky type of goals like, I want to be a millionaire. Well, okay, we all do, all right? We're talking about specific goals that are attainable, that we set, and even if they're grand and bold, we know, at least in our hearts, and like you said, sometimes it may be even in our friends' or families' hearts, that we have the ability to achieve it. But we still must set that right goal.
I think it's important to differentiate sometimes the difference between a vision and a goal. You know, a vision is something that is just a feeling or an end result that you want to have in your life in terms of how you emotionally are feeling about things. And a goal is something that has to be measurable. Those are those action steps, okay? And it has to have a timeline. It just can't be a goal that I'm going to lose 30 pounds. Okay, when? Otherwise, it just never gets done. So you have to kind of force yourself to set a schedule and set some timing to it so that you could click these things off. And then, of course, if you're open-minded, something else might change that'll take you off that in maybe a different direction. But still, if you don't measure it, you really don't know if you're making any progress.
But you even said before, and you have it here, all of those moments have an equal chance of changing our lives. So we have to, as you said, answer that phone and be ready for it.
And I think that's the fun of life, though, is that it goes back to the confidence thing we talked about earlier, is if you feel like you can be, you don't know everything, then everything's possible to know. And with that knowledge, you can do anything.
Well, you even, I've got to find it exactly, Gary. Hold on just 1 second, because this was so good. You know what? I can't find it, so I'm going to have to make it up, all right, just for a second. But it had to do with opportunity knocking. And as you said, it doesn't only knock once. The fickle finger of opportunity can be knocking constantly. So you don't have to be so much afraid of missing the opportunity, because it's always knocking.
And so if you're not listening for the door, though, it could be there forever, and you might miss the whole thing. That's the point of being open to the possibilities. at some point you got to answer it. And also, too, sometimes look behind you in what you've already accomplished. A key person you needed to know, or an event in the past might be a key to an opportunity in the future. And that's how these things link up. And yeah, so you're right. If opportunity can come and go, but it can also hang around for quite a while.
Yet, your words, waiting for and expecting something to happen can freeze a person into a stall.
I think all of us have been at some point where I just don't know what to do next. I don't know how to do it. And my suggestion is, yeah, I've been there. I understand that. A lot of companies I work with are in the same spot, and a lot of people are. That said, try something. Try something that is closer. A little shift, a little change. Get out of your rhythm and your cadence and try something different. And in that trying alone, you actually start to work different parts of your brain, different parts of your energy comes out, and you'd be surprised what you might find.
Well, I want to tell you that I am actually a master of something in your book. You say good judgment requires experience, and the best experience is often gained through bad judgment. Now, as someone who, well, we have a little inside joke in our family, I'll just rephrase it by saying I can sometimes be the king of the bad judgment, but there is no doubt that one really gains wisdom from that. We can't be afraid to fail, to change, even at a drop of a hat, that if we can lose that fear, we don't have to worry about it because we will end up making a good judgment eventually.
You just hit on the key to all change, really, which is the fear of failing. You know, we all have kind of established a brand image of ourselves, a certain kind of perspective on life, and if we shift and change into something that's unknown or we're not that familiar with, there's a risk that we could fail. There's certainly a risk we'll never succeed if we don't try, but the risk of failure sometimes offsets that. And that's where you got to keep talking to yourself and say, hey, if I don't know, I won't know until I do try. And you might fail, but very good chance you could succeed as well.
Well, you really send this message home. I want to use these words because when I read them, I felt internally that this, you know how when sometimes you love to learn something that you've never learned, and sometimes what's even more exciting is to learn something that reinforces what you've already done. This was one of those things. When I read these words, I just went, oh, they're beautiful. If you're stuck on the fence and can't decide, it's better to leap than to fall. So that's a true state of action, because falling is just a submissive blop. But if you're stuck on the fence and you don't know, leap. It almost doesn't matter what direction. You will be better off than letting the wind blow you off.
And I like that myself for the fact that when you do take control of the choice, this way or that way, no matter which way, how it ends, at least you're in control of that particular moment. And that's really the beginning of manifesting any kind of change in your life, is taking that control.
Now, I wasn't expecting to find this actually in this particular book, even though on one level it must exist in every book. This is going to sound strange, but it is the word empathy. And as you say, as simple as the concept of empathy is, to appreciate its power and to use it properly, that's a major key here. And I want you to get into that, because when we think of empathy, we almost think of it as simply just, I do sometimes, as not a very good quality to have, but one that's more of a passive. It doesn't require as much energy. Yet the way you're using it, there's a real energy to empathy.
Well, that's been part of my career for so long, is trying to put myself in the shoes of the people I'm working with. And in that sense, empathy is, yes, I've got to understand what they're feeling or where they're coming from, but I want to start to translate that into something as to basically pointing to where they want to go. So empathy in that sense is a tool to kind of help them get to the same place that you know you can help them get to. That's how I use it.
Gary, that empathy part, though, how does it apply to me? I mean, I see how that works in the business end, but how does the receiver of it?
So if you know that I know that I'm feeling what you're feeling and I have empathy for you, that just says, that in a way that says you can trust me. that I can appreciate where you're coming from and where you want to go. That's the power. It's actually it's the binding of the relationship. Empathy is really understanding that you have an impact and it works both ways.
Gar, I saw in your face when you saw the time. I'm amazed too. Our time is up. I want to thank you though, buddy.
Thank you so much, Barry. My pleasure.
I'm going to end with these words. Remember to enjoy your choices, not just for the end result, but for the journey along the way. Gary, you took us on a beautiful journey.
Thank you.
And thank you guys for joining us. Now, before Gary leaves, I'd like to leave you with these few more words from the Szen Zone. As we spy the possibilities for the future, we have the choice of changing course or changing ourselves, or both. I'm Barry Kibrick. Between changing courses or changing ourselves, there are endless possibilities for the future. Thank you so much, Gary.
Thank you, Barry.
My pleasure.
Closed captioning for Between the Lines with Barry Kibrick is made possible by your generous contributions to KLCS Education Foundation. Thank you for your support. To connect with Barry, like us on Facebook and follow us on Twitter at Barry Kibrick. And to contact Barry directly, watch past episodes of Between the Lines, and read his blog, visit us at barrykibrick.com.